All right, so this is presentation 3 in unit 5, and this is the one over human environment interaction. And so we did this over 2 days, but I'm going to cover it all in one video. All right, so the first thing we're looking at is the Volga River. It's the longest river in Europe, and for Russia, this is where about 60% of all their river traffic occurs on. So it's really big for trade and industry, but before it was used a lot for fishing. But because of pollution, especially from factories, being put into the river and things like that, it's killed off a lot of the fish. So, like the sturgeon, a large percentage of them have died. And so, because of that, these fishermen have had to move to other cities to look for different jobs. So, it's destroyed really the economy of the river as far as what people did that live along the river. And so, they had to move and created ghost towns basically along there. And then we'll go over to the Netherlands. So, the Netherlands, their key issue they have to deal with environmentally is the fact that they're at or below sea level. And so to do that, they've practiced land reclamation. So they've actually reclaimed land from the ocean. And basically this box here, inside this red box, all this land has been reclaimed from the ocean, where they've expanded their country through the works of what's called sea works. And so the land they've conquered, you can say conquered back from the ocean, is called polders. And they do this by creating a series of dams and levees. So again, a polder is just land that they've reclaimed from the ocean. And the other term you need to know here is low countries. So we call this area the low countries because they're at or below sea level. Belgium would fall in that category as well. And we do the same thing like on the East Coast with the Carolinas, like especially South Carolina into Georgia. We call that area the low country along the coast. So basically what they do is they build a dam in the ocean, pump out water from one side onto the other, and as they do that, it creates land on this side. And then they burn it so they get nutrients in the soil and then begin to farm on it. So this is a real photo of it. So you see the ocean on this side. This side used to have the ocean on it, and then they pumped it over so that way they could then farm and live on this side. All right, and there's, of course, a photo of a levee. And then, again, basically how to set it up. You got your dam, and then your sluices or your canals, and then, of course, they pump it over with the use of windmills and things like that, and, of course, modern-day pumps to pump it over. There's your old windmills, which the Netherlands is really famous for, and that's what it's used for, is pumping water out of there. Satellite image, so all this land has been reclaimed from the ocean. So you can see all the farms and stuff on there as well. Here's a much closer photo of it. So again, all that land is reclaimed from the ocean as they push it back. Then the Zuider Zee is this area, this inlet of water that they dammed across. So they blocked it off from the ocean. They're pumping all the water out of the Zuider Zee into the ocean, over time recreating this land up here as well. So the land we were looking at originally in that box is a little bit further south down here, south of Amsterdam. But then you also have this area as well that they're reclaiming. And so this area, so it's them damming it up. And then you can see the dam there on the satellite image going across, blocking off the Zuider Zee, and then all this land is reclaimed from that area. Now switching over to Russia real quick. So you got the Soviet breadbasket. This area here is where most of the farming in Russia occurs, obviously because it's further south. So it's going to have a little bit better climate. And then they also have rich soil there as well. So 25% of all of the Soviet Union's food supply comes from this one region. All right, now switching over to Venice. So Venice is built on a lagoon, really. It has a series of canals. So these are tiny islands, about I think it's around 130, 150, somewhere in there, islands all throughout, and all of these are man-made. Venice was built because the Romans were being attacked by the Germanic tribes 1,500 years ago, and so this group of people lived on the coast of Italy. They decided the best way to escape the Germanic tribes was to go out to this shallow lagoon and build the city, and they wouldn't invade the city, and they were right. So they lived out there, literally built the city on water, created these artificial islands, and the city expanded over time and actually ended up being a great location. So this became one of the richest cities on earth. Could think about all the trade coming in from the Middle East and from East Asia and all that, all came through Venice for the most part, and then into continental Europe. And so this made them insanely rich because of that. But of course, you got some problems here. One is pollution. Water pollution is rampant. If you look at the coast of Italy, which you can't see on here, but the coast of Italy in this area has a lot of oil refineries, and so that's polluted the water quite a bit. And then, of course, also boats and things like that with the use of gas. So this water here used to be like the Caribbean, just crystal blue and beautiful lagoon, and now it's more like that. So it's changed quite a bit. And of course, the other issues they're going to have is going to be flooding. It can get up to the second, even third floor in a lot of these buildings. So flooding is pretty rampant. And of course, we also got rising sea levels due to the polar ice caps melting, so it makes it harder to fight against the flooding. And then, too, you even have to look at, is it worth holding on to the city? I mean, the city is amazing. But is it worth all the money to spend in order to preserve the city over time? Because now it's mainly just a tourist location. I mean, there's about 80,000 people live in Venice. Some are on the mainland and some, of course, in the city, but around 70 to 80,000 people in here. But most of it's going to be with the tourism industry as far as what they're working in. And then some of these are just photos that I took while in Venice. So glass blowing is an industry they've had for about 700 years in Venice. Amazing high quality glass they create there. Here you can see, of course, the canals and how narrow the streets are. So there's no cars or anything like that. People just walk. And this also kind of highlights another problem. You have buildings that are sinking. And, of course, as they sink, they don't just sink straight down. Sometimes they may start bending in towards each other. And so they've put these in between buildings to help kind of keep them separate and from crashing into one another as they slowly sink. There's another canal there. Now, just so you know, these boats here are only used for tourists. People that live there have their own little boats they use to get around these canals. But tourists are the only ones that ride those. And this is just some of the main squares. So it's a main square, St. Mark's Square. And then here you can see destruction from the flooding on the sides of the building. So it can get quite high in there. All right, just keep going. All right, then Amsterdam. So Amsterdam's going to have similar problems as Venice. Now, Amsterdam's not fully in the ocean like Venice is, but Amsterdam does have a large area that's built around canals. And they're going to have the same thing, flooding, pollution. One thing I didn't mention with Venice, but they have, too, of course, more insects and things like that. Fish dying, things of that sort. And so, but Amsterdam will have similar issues. The other thing you'll see in Amsterdam that's a little bit unique, though, is these riverboat houses. So people actually live in the canals on these boats in certain areas, which is pretty cool. So you can just kind of move your house around Amsterdam as you want. All right, then the next thing is the Black Forest. So the Black Forest is in Germany, Austria, Switzerland area. And this area is being destroyed through like acid rain and things of that sort. So you can see there the circle where the Black Forest is. It gets its name because it's really dark inside the forest. It's a very thick forest, so when you're down in there hiking around, it's even in the middle of the day, it just seems kind of dark. But anyways, I mean, really all you need to know is just from pollution and acid rain that the forest is being destroyed, and also just human expansion. I mean, most of continental Europe was a thick forest like that 2,000 years ago, and then as people expanded and started living more throughout Europe, a lot of the forest was taken down. All right, now looking at Russia, looking at their size and also winter and how this has helped them or hurt them. So first off, the way it's helped them is looking at two different people try to invade Russia. First one's Napoleon. Now in this, you can see Napoleon leaving Paris with 422,000 people marching to Moscow. Now you notice these numbers get quite a bit smaller by the time he gets to Moscow. He got 100,000 when he gets there. Most of these people died from starvation and dehydration and stuff like that, but mainly starvation. So as they were crossing over into Russia, the Russians began to retreat, and they practiced something called scorched earth, which is a term you need to know. So scorched earth policy, and that's when you retreat, you burn everything, you kill all your livestock. So that way the invading army has nothing to live off of. So this is basically, this part is the size of Russia helping them out, that it's so big and so hard to get across that people are just dying just trying to march in. So that's the size helping it out. And this yellow line, this is winter, and winter takes out the rest of them. So he gets there in August, and then it's not until October that Napoleon decides to leave Moscow, because everyone's been abandoned, it's gone, and of course he's really prideful, and he wants the people to be there so they can see him destroy Moscow. They don't come back, so he starts marching back in October. And then, of course, by the time he gets back, it gets insanely cold. And so they start dying by the wayside, getting frostbite, things of that sort. And so by the time he gets back to Paris, he has about 10,000 men left. And so this is very detrimental to Napoleon because it's going to be really hard to get anybody else to fight with you after that. All right, then Hitler. So Hitler, who loved world history, Napoleon was his favorite guy, makes a similar mistake. He invades Russia, but he does it in the summer. But he makes a couple of mistakes here. One, he divides his army up. and goes to Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad instead of just going to Moscow. And then he also didn't prepare his troops for winter, so they just had their summer clothing and that's it. And of course, they get bogged down in Russia until winter, and then once winter sets in, the Germans start dying from the cold, and then the Russians are able to push the Germans back. And this is what really led to the fall of Nazi Germany. So a huge mistake on Hitler's part in this area. So again, the size of Russia playing a part, and then of course the winter setting in. Now, another thing with the size of Russia, when you look at it economically speaking, you've got 10 major time zones where most of the cities are. There's a total of 12 time zones, really, if you go all the way across. But most of your cities along these 10 time zones, if you think about that, that's like from here to Iraq. That's about 10 time zones or so, maybe even Afghanistan. So that's a lot of land to cover. And so economically, this can create challenges. Like stock market, for example. When does that open and close, or is it open all the time? Because, I mean, when people are going to bed in Russia, one part of Russia, people are waking up in the other part of Russia and going to work. So, like, how does that going to work? And then also just think about how easy is it going to be for the government in Moscow to control this vast land? Like, are the people over here, like near Vladivostok, are they going to feel connected to Moscow in any way, shape, or form? And this is generally why we see a harsher government in Russia, with more kind of authoritarian type rule, because it's such a big place. They need to have strict control over the country. And the way they did this, especially with the Soviet Union, was in Siberia. They used gulags. So gulag was a Soviet prison camp. And since Russia's so big and it's got so much empty space, government can hide all kinds of things out there in secret because no one really goes out there. So during the Soviet Union, people would disappear. And usually what that meant is they got arrested and they were taken to a gulag and got to work in a Soviet prison camp and then eventually die. And then a way that they kind of overcome their size is the Trans-Siberian Railroad. So they built this to connect all these cities from Vladivostok near North and South Korea all the way to Moscow. Of course, here you just see it ending here, but now it goes all the way to Moscow. So this way, this is like the lifeline for these cities, so they economically are viable. So some of your bigger ones along here would be like Irkutsk and Omsk and places like that. Of course, Vladivostok is a large port city. And then total, I mean, this thing is huge. It's 5,785 miles long. So, I mean, think that's going from New York to LA and then turning back around and going back to New York from LA. So that's a huge railroad. All right, then the Aral Sea, we've talked about this a little bit before. Basically, it's shrinking and disappearing, and it's because the Soviets, when they were in power, they would overuse their resources. They didn't try to conserve them. And so because of over-irrigation, the Aral Sea has pretty much disappeared for the most part. Whenever I would really like early 2000s, the U.S. was saying that it had about 38 years left, and the Russians were saying 68 years. They're just hopeless. I mean, they're just way too optimistic on that. I mean, today, like most of this area is gone. About half of this is left, and a couple of ponds over here. So it's not going to last a whole lot longer, and that's just because of overuse. So you need to know the causes of or not the causes, but the effects of it. So one's the collapse of the local fishing industry. Of course, just like the Volga River, there's a lot of people that relied on it for fishing and their livelihood. That's gone. Increase in pollution due to fertilizer runoff, pesticides, and industrial waste, which has caused an increase in respiratory illnesses and things like asthma and stuff like that. So generally an unhealthy area to live. So you can see where the Aral Sea is for the most part. So around Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, kind of that area of Central Asia. All right, now acid rain. Acid rain mainly occurs in Germany. I'd say occurs in Germany. Like that's where you're going to see a lot of the pollution that's going to cause acid rain. So acid rain is any kind of precipitation that falls from the sky and it catches the pollutants and brings them back down to Earth. So of course mainly come from like burning of coal, gas, and oil by cars, things like that. But here's the effects. So it can damage statues, buildings, and bridges. It weakens them, and basically we just have to spend a lot more money keeping that infrastructure up. It's killed entire fish populations and lakes because of the pollution in the water. The fish don't have enough oxygen and they die. And then it can harm forests and soils, even destroy them as well. So here you can see the population density in Germany. And basically the pollution is going to obviously follow these areas. So your biggest cities and areas are going to have your highest areas of pollution. So the biggest area is right through here. So basically Cologne, Dusseldorf, Essen, Hanover, Leipzig, and Dresden, even down to Frankfurt. So this area is where you can see, of course, your highest concentration of pollution. And really it kind of continues on down to Stuttgart and over to Munich. All right, so here's an example of what it can do to like a statue. So here's the statue in 1908. Here's the same statue present day. And you can see this is just from acid rain, really. Just wearing it down. The face has disappeared. A lot of the details are gone. Now it just looks kind of like smooth rock because that. And this is what it does to a forest. That's a black forest in Germany being destroyed by acid rain. This map, again, just kind of shows where you see most of the forest death in this area due to acid rain. And then in the world, so mainly in Europe, eastern half of the U.S. and Canada, and a little bit in East Asia as well. All right, then air pollution. So to manage pollution, a lot of places, especially in their smokestacks, have put in filters. They've also used static electricity to kind of make the pollutants stick to the side of the smokestacks, and then they use scrubbers and things to wash out the smokestacks and chemical sprays to clean them out. That's one way they've tried to help stop it. But still you get smog. Now, back before all the cleaners and things like that they could use to clean these smokestacks, especially during the Industrial Revolution, you had really dirty industry in places like London. In London, you would get really bad smog. And smog is where you would get the naturally occurring fog that happens in London. It would mix with the pollution. And you would get the smog just kind of settling over the city. But back in the 1800s, the pollution was so bad that on any given day, usually the sun was fairly blocked out from the pollution, and so people were getting vitamin D deficiency. But when that fog would get really thick, and then you mix it in with that pollution, it would be so dark at night you couldn't see your hand in front of your face in the city. And it was obviously incredibly unhealthy, and could of course kill you as well. So here's kind of modern day what it looks like. So it can still get, nasty looking, but not as bad as it used to be by any means, since they are able to clean their factories more so. In 1952, 4,000 people were killed because of smog. Really thick fog came in, and then, of course, the pollution mixing with it killed people. Of course, it destroys buildings and things like that as well. As far as how it kills, it's this. Basically, those little droplets in the fog become sulfur dioxide. And so you're starting to breathe that in. Those droplets get in to your lungs and then kill you. All right, then looking at some natural things occurring in the environment. Mount Etna in Sicily. So we've got two really active volcanoes in Europe. Mount Etna is the most active one by far. It's like I said, in Sicily. It's basically the island that Italy's kind of kicking. But this one's very active. Luckily, there's not like a huge human population in that area. But Mount Vesuvius, though, is right in the middle of a very densely populated area. Vesuvius is the one that's responsible for destroying Pompeii in 79. CE is the same thing as AD. CE stands for Common Era, but it's the same thing as AD, so 79 AD. Along with Herculaneum, were covered in ash from Mount Vesuvius. And it's still active. It blew up the last time. You see here 1944, also some of the 1960s. But modern-day Pompeii has several 100,000 people, and then you got Naples right next to it. Pompeii is basically like a suburb of Naples at this point, and Naples has well over 1 million people, and so you've got a huge population center right around that volcano. And some geographers and geologists even theorize that that area of Italy may actually be sitting on top of a supervolcano as well, and so that would obviously bring about mass death in that region. If that were to ever go off. All right, Chernobyl. If you're in pre-AP, then of course you're supposed to read the article and watch the video clip in Google Classroom and write an essay on that. But just the basic facts. Chernobyl was a nuclear disaster in 1986 in Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union at the time. And so here you can see where it is. There's Chernobyl, north of Kiev. You get near Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Russia. And really, one point I want you to get from this, too, is that whenever there's a disaster like this one, blowing up of a nuclear power plant, it's going to affect more than just one country. It's not just going to affect Ukraine and Russia and stuff like that. It's going to affect, of course, it was part of Russia at the time. It's going to affect this entire region. And not only that, it's going to get over into Central and Western Europe as well. And so because Europe has so many countries close together, anytime you have any kind of disaster on a larger scale, it's going to require the cooperation of countries around them to help them out in order to overcome it. So you can see here soil contamination. So these areas you just really can't farm. that much because everything will be radioactive. So how this happened? So generally speaking, they were running a test and they were shutting down the main power system and all the safety systems to see if the generator would kick in, the backup generator would kick in enough time to cool the reactors before anything happened. Well, obviously that didn't work. So they shut everything off. When power came back, there was a power surge. So the reactor started overheating. Well, it couldn't cool it quick enough to keep it from overheating, and so it blew up. So reactor number 4 blows up, sends a radioactive cloud 3,200 feet in the air, and then, of course, Russia tries to cover it up. So you can see here the reactor, the blue, they encase this in concrete. It needs to be encased for the next 100,000 years before radioactivity is down to a safe level. All right, so the cover-up, you need to know why Russia would cover this up. So the Soviet Union at this point has been weakened quite a bit. They're losing a war in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Economically, they're falling apart. Their last leader, Gorbachev, is just struggling to try to get anything going in Russia. And this happens. And so this is just an embarrassment to them. And so they don't want anybody to know. So for 2 days, they keep it totally secret, hush-hush. They evacuated the city right next to Chernobyl, Pripyat, immediately. The rest of the area, surrounding area, took about 6 days to get them out of there. And basically what happened is European and Western Europe, Central and Western Europe, they started getting readings of higher levels of radioactivity coming from the east. And so they called Russia about it, and Russia denied anything happening. And then they said a small accident, like a small spill happened. And then they said, oh, yeah, it blew up. And so at that point, of course, the West offered to help Russia, but Russia, being prideful and not wanting to show itself as being weak, didn't really accept any help from the outside. But really, and this is what helped bring about the end of the Soviet Union right here, because it weakened them so much with everything else that was going on at that time. Just they couldn't handle it. All right, so the effects of it immediately: 31 people were killed from radiation sickness or burns, or in the explosion. 200 seriously injured. Of course, you got fallout, which caused health problems and things like that. But what's interesting is the health problems weren't actually as big as they thought it was going to be. You know, they were thinking thousands upon thousands of people were going to get cancer and all this stuff, and it actually ended up not being that high at all. And really, the biggest problem that came from Chernobyl was the mental cost. You know, the people that lived near there, they're pretty much told, you're probably going to get cancer. You know, you're not going to you're not going to have a long life, and things like that caused them to give up on their jobs, to give up on their dreams. And so these people became really unproductive, and understandably so. And of course, too, even just like think younger people, thinking about having kids, it's like, well, now you're probably not going to have a kid because you don't want to, because you don't know what could be wrong with them. They could be incredibly sick because of the radioactivity you were subjected to. And so this is going to ruin a lot of people's lives. And so really that was the biggest effect of Chernobyl, is just the psychological damage it had on the people that were near there when this thing blew up. All right, so that's it for this presentation. The next one will be over the history of Europe.